Hey everyone, Happy New Year and welcome back to the first Patreon lesson of 2022. Today's topic is going to be chord voicings and voice leading. There'll definitely be a part 2 to this as well because it's quite a big topic, so leave me any questions after the video in the chat or whatever, and we'll get to those in part 2 for sure. So we'll check out my favorite chord type, which it's called drop 2. It's probably my favorite because I use it the most, and I think it's probably the easiest on guitar to play. So we'll look at all the inversions associated with, for example, major 7s, minor 7s, dominant 7s, half diminished, major 9, minor 9, and then some diminished shapes as well that you can throw in between the inversions to create kind of full scales using chords. And then we'll look at how to practice all this stuff. So there's definitely a few ways we can do that, as well as some experimentation you can do around these shapes to kind of make them a little bit more interesting and a little bit more unique to you and your style. And also I've attached the tab which just has all those voicings listed, and I split them up into 3 strings, the 6-string shapes, 5th-string shapes, 4th-string shapes. So that just refers to what the bass note is. So first of all, before we begin, I guess we should look at what drop 2 actually means. And essentially it refers to the order in which the intervals are stacked. So the most basic way that we can stack a chord would be in thirds. So for example, for a C major 7, it might look like this: the 1, the major 3rd, the 5th, and then the major 7th. So what drop 2 refers to is that the second note, in this case the major 3rd, instead of it being within the octave, it's pushed up an octave. So just remember, drop 2 refers to the second note pushed up an octave. So it isn't dropped up the octave, pushed up the octave. So if we do that, this E here will be this E here on top, and we keep the other notes the same. So instead of playing the 5th and the major 7th there, play them there. And then we have the E on top, and then add the C back in. So we have that shape there, which is actually just that shape. So that shape's pretty common for a major 7. That's just up the octave there, same exact note. And you can hear it's a bit of a wider sound, obviously because we're now pushing the intervals beyond an octave. We're covering more range within the instrument. You know, there's no right or wrong with any of these. It's just whatever sound you're after. So in a drop 2, just a little bit wider than say just stacking a chord in thirds. So that's, I guess, the idea of what drop 2 actually means. So when you hear that term, that's what it refers to. It's taking that second note within the chord that's stacked in thirds, the basic version of any chord, and then pushing it up an octave. So that's drop 2. Now I think before we start as well, I would really suggest with chord voicings that you do learn every single interval. You know, what interval you're playing within a chord, what, say for example, what the bass note is and what the top note is. I think that really comes in handy when you start to think about voice leading, as well as writing chord melodies. Whenever I write a chord melody or write one of my etudes or whatever, that's kind of what I'm focusing on. Is the intervals within the chord and how they might relate to the next chord. Really thinking about the melody of chords, which would be the top note. So the highest note in the chord, that's the melody note. So that's the note that you are kind of framing with the chord. In this case here, with this major 7, that note there, the 3rd, is the chord the note that stands out the most, because that would be the voice. The voice would be kind of singing that. That's the melody. If we have a melody under, you know, and then we're framing that melody note with the notes underneath. So try and think about chords that way. Try and think about every single interval as we play them: 1, 5, 7, 3. It really helps with your fretboard knowledge as well. If you start to do this a lot, you're actually seeing all the most important notes spread out across the entire fretboard. Maybe even associate it with a pentatonic position. For example, this here, right, would fit into that pentatonic position there. You know, if we're thinking in A minor, that would be the 5th shape. And then see where that chord fits in within that shape. So 1, 5, 7, 3. So that's just drop 2s and a quick thing about the intervals. So now we'll check out the rest of them. So you can pull up the tab now. So we'll go through each chord shape. We'll start with the major sevenths. So we'll look at it from the key of C. So that's our first one, obviously. We call the first chord the root inversion because the root note's on the bass. Now, inversions essentially refer to just moving the shape through the set of intervals, through the arpeggio, basically. So our arpeggio here is our major 7 arpeggio, which is 1, 3, 5, 7. So every note here, the next note to find the next inversion, we move through the arpeggio. So for example, this root note, what's the next note in the arpeggio? It's the 3. So we place the 3 there, that's our next note. We have a 5th next, which moves up to the major 7th. That's the next note in the arpeggio. Then we have a major 7 here, which moves up 1 to the root note. We have a major 3rd, moves up 1 to the 5th. We add all those intervals together, we get 3, 7, 1, 5. And there's our first inversion of C major 7. Now that shape's really cool. I really like that shape because it's so spread out, and we have a really cool concept in the middle here, which is a semitone. And now it sounds really shite just by itself, but if we frame it within these wider intervals, it becomes really pretty. So that's kind of a cool concept. Very common for piano players to do this, where we have a tone or a semitone in the middle. It's very common for these drop 2 voicings to have that in certain areas because the 7 and the 1 sometimes are right next to each other. So we have that here, 7 and the 1. So in this case we have the 5th on top, that's our melody note, and then the 3rd in the bass. So there's the first 2 chords. So next one, these are all going to be starting on the 5th string. So next one looks like this. So if we follow our arpeggio, all these notes moving up 1 note are going to equate this 5th, the 1st, the 3rd, and the major 7th. So major 7 on top, our melody, 5th in the bass. That's a really useful chord. I guess most people probably know it from this one. We'll get to that. I guess that's the chord shape starting on the 4th string rather than the 5th string. It's useful to know them in all the positions possible. So root inversion, first inversion, second inversion. The next one, the last one, is this. It's probably the chunkiest kind of sounding one and the most dissonant, only because we have a major 7th in the bass and a root note on top, which is kind of unusual. So it does sound kind of weird. I find this one probably my least used out of all of these shapes. That's it in a different position, but there's a few things we can do to make that one sound a little bit more useful. So we'll check those out. And then we just are back at the octave. So you can continue that octave up. And you should hear the arpeggio on top. So that's 5th string, drop 2s for C major 7. So next we'll check out the C major 7 drop 2 chord shapes, but now starting on the D string, so the 4th string. The first one is this first inversion shape, so it's the same as this one. You can see it's basically the same shape with just this first finger has to be moved up 1, the B string. Exact same notes, exact same octave, but it's really useful to know, you know, every single position of these chords on the fretboard. So whatever region you're in, you know, you're not jumping around the fretboard to find the voicing you want. The next one looks like this, everybody's favorite chord shape. The next one is this. We've already briefly touched on that. Next one's this one. Also briefly touched on that. That's this one, but up the octave, and we're back to this shape here. A group of chords will be starting on the 6th string. So we'll look at this one, the second inversion first. This one's a great chord shape, sounds really dark. the fifth in the bass with the root note. You know, kind of gives it that strong kind of power chord feel, even though it's not really a power chord at all, but it sounds really dark. I really like that chord shape. Then the next one would be this. So it's that kind of awkward third inversion there, but kind of sounds quite interesting in the lower octave. Then we have the classic one, the root inversion, and then we have our stretchy one with the semitone in the middle. Sorry, it's kind of hard to grab. And then we're just back at the octave. So a way to practice all this stuff, I'll quickly touch on this now because we've kind of gone through all the major ones. We'll go through the other chord types in a second, but I'd say one way to practice this is almost like you're running a scale or arpeggio. You just move through all the shapes, you know, with a metronome click on just for each string. So, you know, this would be all the 6-string shapes. Just getting familiar with that, and then you would do the same for the 5th string. And then you would do the same for the 4th string. And then what you could do next is just start to kind of randomize it across the fretboard. So maybe move through all the shapes like within one position like this, and then the next position, skip one. Maybe make like a little pattern like that. Just start to experiment with, oh, what if I go to this region of the neck? You know, where's my shape here? Move like that through them. Just test yourself and experiment with where all these shapes are across the fretboard. So you just familiarize yourself with them all. Kind of idea. I think that's a great way to practice them, jumbling them all up, but first practicing them in order of string sets. So we have our 6-string shapes, 5th string shapes, 4th string shapes, the octaves, as many as you can do on the fretboard. You know, often I'm starting them from a different inversion, you know, especially on these lower strings where we can start them, you know, on the kind of the lowest possible chord shape. Once you have them in one key like this C major, start to move them around because we really need to know where they are across the entire fretboard for each key. So that's our major 7s, drop 2s. So next we'll just move down to the next line in the tab, so that's minor 7. So I'll go through this one a little quicker because it's basically the same idea. Focus on the same things like looking at the intervals, how it's structured is going to be the same. So, you know, instead of a 3rd and 7th, we now have flat 7s and flats 3s. That might be one way to just get into these shapes is just know the 1 and the 5 are the same. So if you can try and see that, then it makes things a little easier. You already know 2 out of the 4 notes where they are positioned across the neck. Once again, relate these to the minor pentatonic shapes like we did with the major, I think is useful. Focus on what the melody note is and the bass note as you're going through all this stuff. And we'll look at the 3 different string sets. So let's start at the 5th string. So the first shape's this one. Everybody definitely knows this one already. Just a classic bar chord shape of a minor 7. Very useful for a minor 7 there. So the next inversion's this one, which is a really nice shape actually. It sounds more like a major 6 chord in my opinion. It is the minor 7. But yeah, it's kind of a pretty version of a minor chord. Next one's this one, which is very useful. And next one's this. So 3rd inversion, 2nd inversion, 1st inversion, root inversion. Up to the root inversion. Here we have the minor 3rd on top in the melody, the root note in the bass, 5th on the melody, minor 3rd in the bass, 5th in the bass, minor 7th on top, root note on top, minor 7th in the bass. 4th position, C minor pentatonic, 5th position, C minor pentatonic, 1st position minor pentatonic, 3rd position minor pentatonic, and then we're back to 4th position. Really useful to think about those minor 7 shapes in amongst these pentatonics. So that's the 5th string. Let's look at the 4th string now. So the lowest we can start on is this one here, which is our 1st inversion. So 5th in the melody, minor 3rd in the bass. Same shape as this one. Same group of intervals and same stack of intervals as this one. Slightly different shape, but basically the same. And then we have this one, our useful one here. Next we have this, definitely the easiest one to play. And then we have this, which is just that, the octave. And then let's look at the 6th string shapes. That's our lowest one we can do for C minor. 5th in the bass, minor 7th on top. There's our bar chord. There's our major 6 kind of bar, the 1st inversion. And then back to the octave. So once again, practicing them just through, highest to lowest, 6th string, 5th string, and then same thing for the 4th string, and then you can start to jumble them all up. Awesome, so we've done major 7, minor 7, so onto the 3rd line where we have dominant 7ths. Now these ones are also very useful. I don't use these as much as the major 7ths and minor 7s, I should say, so I think the major 7s, minor 7s are definitely the priority as far as learning these shapes go. Obviously dominant 7ths are really useful too, but there's more things we can do with dominant 7ths, and we can actually borrow different chord types for them, and that sounds sometimes even better than using these drop 2s, but I think it's worthwhile knowing these ones. So first of all, start with the bar chord version again. So we'll look at the 5th string first. So bar chord version's that. The root inversion, major 3rd on top. Root note is the 1. So the bass note is the root. Next inversion looks like this. So now we have the major 3rd in the bass, and the 5th on top. Next shape is this, flat 7 in the top, in the melody, and the 5th on the bottom, and then the last shape is this. And then we're back to the root. So there's our dominant 7ths for the 5th string. For the 4th string, we have that one, that one's nice and easy. We have that, and this, and then back to the top again. For the 6th string shapes, start off with that one. That one's quite crunchy. I like that. So similar to the major 7th because of those. That's a really cool shape. Next we have this. So same shape as that. Then next we have this one, the bar chord, and then lastly we have this. Start to jumble them up. And lastly we have our minor 7 flat 5, so half diminished chord shapes. Definitely include these ones. These are really great. First one is probably the one most people know. It's this shape here. we have the minor third on top, the root note in the bass, flat 5 and a flat 7 in the middle, so half diminished, the chord structure is 1, and we have flat 3s, flat 5s and flat 7s. So that's our first shape. Second shape's this. So now we have the flat 3 in the bass and the flat 5 in the melody. Then the next shape is this one. And then the last shape on the 5th string is that. For the 4th string shapes, in that. And then for the 6th string, we have these. Great, so I think those are the most important chord shapes we can look at. It's drop 2s for the most fundamental chord types, major 7, minor 7, dominant 7th and half diminished. And you know, with those shapes in hand, you'll be able to play most standards very comfortably. And we'll look at how to apply those chords to standards in a second, but if you have them down and have them memorized, I think it's really, you know, you're going to be comfortable playing over most standards, especially if you really know where all the keys are. So check them out. That's probably how I'd practice them. Once again, you know, do them per string set first. 5th string, probably the priority, then check out 4th string and then the 6th string shapes. And then also mix in into your practice just kind of that attitude of just trying to experiment across the neck with all those chord shapes, finding different avenues, finding different roots throughout the fretboard. Try and really link them to pentatonic shapes, and that half diminished one and the dominant 7th one might be a little hard, but especially for the major 7th, minor 7th. Link them to minor pentatonic shapes, and then also really try and think about the intervals within each chord type, because when it comes to arranging a standard with chords, like kind of doing a chordal arrangements, you kind of have to know, you know, which chord types give you, say, a third in the melody. You know, the melody might be a third, you need to frame it within a chord, you need that third to be on top, so which chord types have a major third on top, and then you can go for it from that point. So really try and focus on those intervals, because it helps with everything in the future, and it's really great fretboard knowledge to be able to recall exactly what every single one of those intervals is. I think maybe it helped me the most with that kind of interval analysis thing, really thinking, because you're thinking about 4 notes at once, so really, like, it's a great exercise for your brain to recall all those notes, exactly where they are. So the second way to practice these chord shapes, and basically all chord shapes in general, is kind of an experimentation with the intervals surrounding the chord shape. This is really useful to kind of turn these chords, you know, that most people are kind of aware of, into maybe your own thing, and create some interesting variations of these chords that are maybe unique to you and to your playing. And it's definitely something to experiment with and play around with. Basically, it involves finding other notes surrounding these chord shapes that might work within the chord shape. So let's take the most basic example, would just be looking at this C major 7 root inversion. And first of all, I guess we want to experiment around with the melody note. So in this case, the melody note is a major third. So what other options do we have? I guess on the B string, we have 2 kind of clear options. One would be the major 2nd. So we're removing the pinky and then flattening the 1st finger. So instead of this, we now get this. so like a major 9 without the third. The other option would maybe be bring this note here up a tone, so making it a major 7 sharp 11 without the third. So there you can see two examples of turning a basic shape into maybe a bit more of an interesting sound by changing around that melody note. Now we could do that for any number of notes within this chord shape. So for example, what about the second note? We can move that around. So first of all, we can maybe move it down a semitone to the sharp 11. So now it'd be 1, sharp 11, 7, 3. So we get that shape, which is a really useful chord actually, and a really crunchy chord that it's almost very pianistic actually. I feel like most piano players really love to use that kind of a chord. And then also, what about if we move this fifth up a tone to the 6? Now we get a major 13 type sound, which is 1, 6, 7, and 3. That's a really cool shape. Another thing you could do to completely kind of blow the sound out of the water and make it more dark and kind of augmented sounding is turning that 6 into a flat 6. And now we get a major 7 sharp 5 chord, which is a great sound, very useful. What else can we do? We could do with the 5th string. So we have that, this major 6, sharp 5, flat 5. We could do the 3rd. Usually you don't want to double notes, you know, within a chord, the octave, because we've already got that 3rd on top. So we've just got an octave of that 3rd, but some instances it can sound kind of cool. In this case, that does sound pretty cool. We could turn it into a 9, so that 3rd, remove it for the D to become the 9. And then we have that, which is really crunchy because we have that tone, sorry, in the bass there. You can see how much experimentation you can do with this stuff. It's really quite a lot. So just take each shape at a time and figure out some kind of cool options that you could use in your own playing surrounding these basic shapes. Right, a lot of different melodic options here. We can kind of combine them together, and we really can start to think of a lot of options, and this is all just coming from this initial chord shape here. Starting with that and then experimenting around. So do that for each shape. That one's really useful. We could even, like, instead of this B string on the top, we could throw the high E string on top, which is kind of, that's the sharp 5 again, major 6, major 7th. So replacing that major 7th here with this 9. That's 1, 5, 9, 7. So a lot of options, a lot of experimentation you can do, and that's only the first shape. So let's check out this one. What can we do here? I guess we could change that 5 up a tone. So instead of a 5th, we can now have a 13, the 6. That's a really great chord, really stretchy, kind of Alan Holdsworth vibes. Major 3rd in the bass, semitone in the middle, and then a really high note on top, the 13. So a C major 13 there. Then we could move that note down a semitone to the sharp 11. That's kind of cool as well. We could mix in the high E string. So for example, flattening that finger to hit the 13. Do that like that. And that's, you know, less options for this one just because it is a tricky shape to begin with. We have this, so everybody's favorite. We can really do a lot of experimenting with this one. Turn it into that. Right, moving that 3rd down to the 2nd. So major 9. We could play around with this bass note. Even doing stuff like this. So the major 7th, the 6, sharp 5, 5, sharp 11. just some ideas on how to experiment with these chord shapes and kind of make them your own. Have fun with that. There's no, I guess, rules. It's just maybe even tab out or write down your favorite ones. So as you're experimenting, make a little note of your favorite ones, and then I'd really recommend actually writing a tune with them. So I think one of the best ways to learn how to use any musical device or any tool, even, you know, in production, I'm just thinking as examples of, you know, using a plugin that you aren't familiar with yet, it's actually to write a song with it, because then you're diving into the kind of the purpose straight away and using it for its intended purpose, which is to write music and make music. So take, you know, one of those chords and then start to try and make it a piece of music. Maybe it's this chord that you really like, you know, and you want to write a piece with it. So you could start to kind of construct something over that, make some kind of rhythmic pattern that you like, arpeggiating it, you know, in a way, maybe mixing that with one of the other ones, maybe that. So that could be kind of a riff, maybe. Maybe, yeah, some ideas could come from that. I don't know, just kind of have fun with it and experiment around with these chord shapes that can lead to songs really quickly, especially if you pick a couple that are, you know, some of your favorites. Start to link them with different keys. We'll talk a little bit more about voice leading in a second, but you can use that for sure to kind of inspire riffs, chordal riffs or tunes or whatever. So that was kind of experimenting with the major sevens. Obviously we can do that with the minor sevens, with the dominant sevens, with the half diminished. I would definitely recommend. Definitely the major and the minor are the easiest and probably the most useful to do that for. Give the others a go. It's not as important, I don't think, but the major seven, minor seven, definitely experiment around with those and figure out which shapes are your favorites and maybe write a tune with them or write a couple licks with them. Whatever you want to do. Have fun with it though. I think that's definitely part of practice. It's doing the methodical stuff, but then also kind of experimenting and having fun with it all. So next we're going to look at a cool concept that was really popularized by, I guess, piano players more so than guitar players, especially someone called Barry Harris, you know, is a legendary jazz pianist and educator. He really popularized this method, and essentially what it involves is attaching a chord, especially drop twos on guitar, to every single note within a 8-note kind of bebop scale. The scale that is a minor scale but with a major seventh. So the intervals would be 1, 2, flat 3, 4, 5, flat 6, flat 7, major 7, 1. So that's going to be our scale, and now what we're going to do is mix in diminished voicings. So they would look like this, for example, you know, this little shape or this shape, or even on the 6th string. Those shapes there, and obviously if we move them around by minor thirds, it ends up being the exact same chord across the entire fretboard. And then what we're going to do is mix in minor 7 chords throughout that. So what we're going to get is a list of minor 7s followed by diminished 7s, and it's going to be alternating. So our minor 7s obviously hit the notes that are the arpeggio, so the 1, flat 3, 5, and flat 7. So let's go G minor, because we're already kind of playing in that key. And if we do drop twos, let's go on the 4th string. So the first one, lowest possible one, would be that for G minor, which is our 3rd inversion. Then we got 1st inversion. Sorry, then we got root inversion, 1st inversion, 2nd inversion, back to 3rd inversion. So you can hear that, that's our arpeggio. You can hear the arpeggio on top, 1, flat 3, 5, flat 7, 1, flat 7, 5, flat 3, 1. So we've already got 4 out of the 8 notes of the scale that we're doing, minor 7 scale with a major 7th, and we've got a voicing attached to each one of those, the arpeggios. So now we're going to use these diminished voicings to hit the other 4 notes, the other 4 notes being a 2nd, a 4th, a flat 6, and a major 7th. And what that's going to do is fill out the entire chord. And now these diminished shapes, what they are actually outlining is D7s, but with the flat 9. So it ends up being D7 flat 9 voicings if we look at the notes of the diminished 7 arpeggio built off any one of those notes, the 2, 4, flat 6 or major 7th of G minor. Let's go this one here, which is built off the major 7th in the bass, the 2 on top. If we look at those intervals in relation to D, what do we have? We have a 3rd, a flat 7, a flat 9, and a 5th. The 4 notes that arguably are the most important for a D dominant 7th. Meaning that every single one of these diminished shapes here that are stacked in minor thirds is just an inversion of a D7 flat 9 chord. Perfect for our 5 chord. So we have G minor, which is our 1 chord, D7 flat 9, which is our 5 chord, G minor again, 1 chord. So essentially we're alternating 1s and 5s, 1, 5, 1, 5. Making this such a useful concept because it allows us to outline an entire scale with chord voicings that makes sense. It's not like we're doing G minor, A minor, B flat major, C sharp 7, right, moving through the modal sounds. We're moving through 1 and 5s of a particular scale. Kind of much more effective in a way in outlining that chordal sound. So you can hear how strong that sounds. And you can hear we can start to create little melodies on top. Mixing in some of those chromatic diminished as well, you know, like that. So that's something really useful to practice. So minor 7 chord, diminished, minor 7, diminished, and look at what those melody notes are. So we have the 1, 2, minor 3rd, 4, 5th, flat 6, flat 7, major 7th, back to the 1. Such an effective tool, especially when harmonizing a melody, for chordal soloing as well. Guitarists that really use this concept, and I think have taken it to, you know, extreme levels, as someone like Joe Pass, someone like Wes Montgomery, George Benson, I guess, as well. Those guys really use this stuff extremely well, you know, not to mention piano players as well from that era especially, and all the way up to modern players. Everyone kind of uses this concept in some way or another when they're looking at chords and chord voicings. So I can't remember what the name of this stuff is. I think Barry Harris calls it a diminished 6th scale, if that's, yeah, I'm not sure, I can't exactly remember, but that's the sound essentially. So you can practice that on each string set again. So let's look at what it would be on the 4th string. That'd be the lowest possible G minor, right? First inversion, flat 6 in the bass, flat 7 in the bass, major 7th in the bass, 1, 2, 3, 4, and back to 5. Let's look at the 6th string. Once again, move this stuff kind of around the neck, experiment around, kind of, you know, know, take risks as far as jumping up to places maybe you're not extremely comfortable with. Just start to learn the entire fretboard through these shapes. Awesome. So the next thing we'll check out is, you know, maybe a few more kind of spicier shapes related to drop 2 and kind of this idea of creating inversions. And I got this stuff from Lage Lund. Hopefully that's how you pronounce his name. One of my favorite guitarists, modern guitarists, really incredible musician, and knows so much about this chordal stuff. I mean, it's kind of next level how he approaches all this chordal all these kind of chordal concepts. But this is one thing I picked up from him, which was really awesome and something I use a lot. It's the inversions for major 9 and minor 9 shapes. They're similar chord shapes to, you know, the standard ones, but we don't use the 5th. So that's, I guess, one little idea there, that these chord shapes, it's actually the John Mayer chord shape. So that's the chord shape we're going to start with for the major 9. The minor 9 is the equivalent, but that one. So those are the 2 shapes that we're going to invert now and find, you know, 3 other inversions for each one. So the inversions of the major 9, that's our major 9, the classic John Mayer shape. If we look at the intervals of this shape, we have a 1, 3, 7, and then the 2 is on top. So that's our set of intervals, our kind of data set intervals wise. And if we start to move that through the arpeggio, we get these shapes. So here's the second one. So from the root, we move up 1, we got the second. The third, there's no 5th, so we skip that, go straight to the 7, place that there. The 7 goes up to the root, the 2 goes up to the 3. So second shape looks like this, which is a really interesting shape for a major 7. Doesn't even really sound like a major 7, especially in this octave. If it's up higher, it would, but you could even use that more as like a D7 chord, D9 chord, because we have, if in relation to D, we have a 1, 6, and then a flat 7, and then a 2. So it could be used for that instead. First root inversion, first inversion. The next one's really useful. I really like this shape. It's very Alan Holdsworth sounding, and it looks like this. So 3, the 1, the 2, and then the 7. So once again, it's kind of copying this same idea here, where we have the second in the middle there, and then framed with wider intervals at either end. Third inversion of this sounds like this. I'll play it here. Stay consistent. So this is quite an interesting sounding one. It's got the 7 in the bass, the root note on top. We have the second and the third in the middle, stacked as a tone. So definitely the most useful 2 would be that one, second inversion and root inversion. So that's everything on the 5th string. So let's look at the 4th string here. So these ones kind of get a little stretchy. We can play that one there, do the root inversion there. We got second inversion there, isn't too bad, and then that one's really pretty up high. So this one actually, especially when we have that lower C in the bass, really does sound quite interesting. There's all the major 9s. Let's look at the minor 9s now as well. So that's our minor 9 shape to begin with. So same exact interval structure, 1, flat 3, flat 7, and then the 2, the 9 on top. So that's our first one. Second inversion looks like this. Quite a hard shape to play. And it sounds kind of weird as well, to be honest, but it's handy to know. You can use it for some things like writing a track. Maybe you really want that sound in there. It does sound quite unusual, even with the proper bass note. And it's very hard to play because we have to flatten this second finger like this, almost like a little banana or something, but keep that B string from being muted. So we need that B string to be able to ring through because we have our first finger on the B string there. So it's a very hard one to play. It feels really weird. So not that useful, just because it's so hard to play. The next one is very cool though. So it's this shape here, which is awesome. So that's second inversion. We can play it like this. We could also play it like this, which I guess is like that. That's probably the best way. So flat 3, 1, 2, and then flat 7. However you want to play it. Then the last one is this shape here, which is really awesome. So we have that semitone in the middle again, flat 7 on the bass, root note in the melody. So all these together. Experiment around with those ones. They're kind of unique sounding and not many people kind of use those inversion. Yeah, they can just be substituted for any minor chord or any major chord really. They just don't have the fifths in there and we have the nines instead. So I think that's all the shapes I'll show you today. Just a few more things, I guess, ideas about how to practice this stuff. The idea of kind of voice leading and starting to use some of this stuff in the context of, say, like jazz standards or something. So let's go through, say, Autumn Leaves, and I'll teach you kind of about how to use this stuff and use it in a way where the voice leading is really, really strong. This helps with improvising single note lines because now we have kind of frameworks for where the best notes are. Because if we think about these shapes, and we'll just use the first 4 shapes that I showed you, they are just 1, 3, 5, and 7, 4 most important notes of any scale. Especially to outline a certain chord, those are the notes you need. So it's really useful for that, as well as just comping, obviously, and seeing voices across the neck kind of linked together. So the idea is that whatever chord you start on, so let's pick Autumn Leaves. So the chord progression is C minor, F7, B flat major, E flat major, A half diminished, D7, G minor. We'll just look at those chords there. Whatever chord we start on, inversion we start on, obviously we're starting on a C minor, but whatever inversion we start on, say we just start on maybe, let's go like second inversion, this one here. So, sorry, let's go with first inversion, for example. So we'll start with this chord here. Here's our root inversion, so just the next one up for our C minor. We choose, yeah, we're going to just use that as our first chord. What is the nearest F7 to that? That's kind of the question we need to ask, because voice leading refers to where the voices, good voice leading refers to where the voices are basically right next to each other when they move from chord to chord, creating strong melodies in the top because the notes are close together and we kind of have this scalic sound, or the notes actually stay the same, which is a very important part where actually, you know, switching between 2 chords, we might keep a few notes the same so that only 1 or 2 notes change. So that's exactly what happens here with drop 2 voicings as we start to voice lead them through. So the nearest F7, it's not this one, although that would be a decent option, right? That doesn't sound bad. Some of the notes are staying the same. We've got kind of movement in there as well, scalic movement, our melodies. Da, da. There's a better option though, maybe, voice leading wise, arguably, like that one sounds great too. The closest one, however, is this. So that F sharp 7 there, you can hear that the notes, these 2 here stay the same, and then it's these 2 that are moving down like that. Basically just one note within the scale each. Hear how strong that sounds. And then next, if we move to B flat major, you know, we wouldn't just go to that shape. We could, but we're sticking within drop 2s. The closest possible B flat major would be this one here, first inversion. And once again, we've got 2 notes that stay the same. and then two notes that move down. So far we've got this. We start to create that strong melody on top. So this is the exercise. It's going through a standard with drop twos, finding the nearest possible chord inversion for the next chord. Next we have E flat major, so we could basically move up to this one here. That would be one option. Da, da. Or we could move down to kind of complete the voice leading idea to this one. Da. Maybe that's only, that might not be super strong in context of a band, but because it's quite a crunchy chord, but in this case, following the exercise, it works nicely. And then we need to find a half diminished chord. So the closest one will be this, first inversion. So we go from, and then we need to find a D7, closest possible is this. And then G minor. So voice leading wise, you can see we're basically moving two notes at a time, changing two notes. We're changing two notes at a time, and we're creating that chordal pattern using drop two shapes. And really strong and kind of correct voice leading. And then this stuff can be turned into improvised lines. We can start to do the same thing from any chord shape. So say for example we start on this C minor and we experiment down, that would be the F7, B flat major would be that, E flat major would be that, A half diminished would be, we could go there if we want, or we could do this one, and then we could do for the D7 be that, and then G minor be that. So give that a go. Play through a couple standards, some of your favorite ones I guess, and try and use these drop two voicings throughout. It's such a great way to practice this stuff, and ties into ideas of voice leading where all the voices are moving really nicely together. Only a few notes are changing at a time between chord shapes. We're getting strong melodies on top. Another thing you could do is sing those melodies too. So as a test for yourself, kind of tying in your ear actually to what these intervals sound like as well. Definitely recommend doing that. And that's I think we'll conclude today. That's plenty to work on. There's definitely more things with chords that we can talk about, a lot more stuff. We can check out a few more voicing types like drop threes, as well as the idea of playing voicings that aren't actually built off root notes. That's a very common thing in jazz, and I guess quickly just to talk about that, for example, instead of playing like say C major 7, a really good alternative would maybe be E minor 7, just because we get the same notes as C major 7 but just without the C, and the note that we get that's different is the D, which in relation to C is the 2. So we start to get ninth chords by playing up a third from the original root note. So we'll look at that a bit more maybe next time, because that's a whole nother topic, but just to introduce that today. Hope you all enjoyed this lesson, and write any questions for next month. Maybe we'll look at part 2 then. Hope you have a good month. I'll see you in a few weeks for the breakdown of an etude or something, and yeah, have a good January everyone, have a good holidays, and talk to you soon.